Hey guys, tonight we're stepping inside an old French monastery where the walls are a little too quiet, and one particular door, room 11, hasn't been knocked on in over a century. You arrive in just as the fog rolls in, thick brushing over the stone path like a cat that knows exactly where it's going. The monastery rises out of the mist like a ship caught in a ghost story, except you're not sailing away, you're checking in. The lantern above the main gate flickers. The iron hinges complain softly as the massive wooden door groans open. And before you even take your first step inside, you feel it like the cold isn't just around you, but in you, twisting gently behind your ribs. It's not malevolent, not yet, just curious. You probably won't survive this as a sleepover destination, but hey, what's life without a little mystery? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It or so, you stand in the outer courtyard, the stone damp beneath your boots. Monastic silence wraps around the buildings, only broken by the occasional drop of water slipping off the gargoyle heads lining the eaves. Each one is different. One smirks, one snarls, one seems to yawn lazily in your direction. A small sign in carved and faded wood says Abbé Saint-Ombline, established in 1128. Historians still argue whether the abbey was originally Benedictine or part of a more obscure and reclusive French order known for emphasizing silence and sensory deprivation as spiritual practice. Either way, the structure itself is a palimpsest of stone Romanesque base, Gothic arches, a splash of Renaissance here and there, like someone played historical roulette during renovations. You walk toward the entryway. The front door is open, but no one stands at it. There's a faint aroma of lavender, wet paper, and unexpectedly soup. You hear a single slow chime from a distant bell tower, though no visible bell rope or mechanism is in sight. Inside the entry hall is dim lit by beeswax candles clinging to iron sconces. A wooden crucifix watches quietly from above the front desk where a dusty guest book lies closed. A brass bell sits beside it, tarnished but still dignified. You hesitate before ringing it. You don't need to. A monk in brown robes appears from the shadows as if materializing from the walls. His footsteps made no sound. You try not to jump, but he's already smiling in that beatifically detached way monks often master by year 5. He introduces himself as Brother Mathieu. His voice is low, sanded smooth with age and ritual. He gestures for you to follow, leading you deeper into the cloistered heart of the abbey. The hallway narrows slightly, as if the building's bones are squeezing in. We don't receive many guests in the colder months, he says, glancing briefly at a hallway to the right. A darkened passage you instinctively know leads to the guest rooms. Each chamber has its own story, he adds, though. Some stories don't need retelling. He pauses at a fork in the hall and gestures left toward a small room where a kettle waits on a cast iron stove. Tea first. The weather clings to newcomers. The room is cozy, unexpectedly modern, with mismatched cushions and a stack of books that look more thumbed than sacred. A cat you hadn't noticed before stretches luxuriously on a nearby stool and gives you a withering look before deciding you're not worth her time. Brother Mathieu pours tea. We've locked room 11, he says casually, as though discussing weather. Just so you know, it hasn't had a guest since, well, a very long time. You ask why, of course. There are some doors, he says slowly, you don't knock on unless they knock first. You chuckle because you assume he's joking. He does not chuckle back. As you sip, your gaze wanders to a tapestry hanging behind him. It shows Saint Christopher crossing a river child on his shoulder, but the thread around the child's face is damaged, blurred, warped, as though the weaver's hands trembled. You could almost swear the child's eyes just moved. Almost. The tea has a floral note, chamomile maybe, or belladonna. Probably chamomile. Probably. As you finish your cup, Brother Mathieu rises. I'll show you to your room, he says, but best you don't explore too far at night. This place remembers. You laugh. He doesn't. The hallway feels even colder on the way back. Stone beneath your feet. Ancient wood above. Your own breath is barely audible, but you hear something faint ahead like pages turning. Brother Mathieu stops at a door labeled 14 your room. He unlocks it but glances toward a door 2 spaces down, plain unmarked but very clearly not forgotten. A faint draft curls from beneath it. You can't help but ask, room 11. He doesn't answer. He's already walking away. You step into room 14. It's sparse but clean. A single bed, a wooden desk, a candle in a wrought iron holder, and oddly a small silver bell on the nightstand. When you pick it up, it's warm. The door clicks shut behind you, and you realize he didn't give you a key. Outside somewhere in the stone bones of this ancient abbey, a door creaks open. Or maybe it was just the wind. Or maybe room 11 just knocked. You lie down on the bed in room 14, the mattress slightly uneven. The kind that lets you know too many monks and too many winters have softened its core. The blanket is wool-scratchy against your skin, but comforting in its way, like being hugged by a sheep with unresolved trauma. The candle on the bedside table flickers once, twice, then steadies. You try not to glance toward the door, but you do, twice. Room 11 waits down the hall like a secret you were never supposed to learn. The bell on the nightstand gleams quietly, not ringing, not moving. But you still check that it hasn't shifted closer. Above you, the ceiling beams creak. Not unusual for a building nearly 900 years old. The abbey is older than the printing press, older than the Black Death. Historians still argue whether it once housed a brief but curious experiment in communal silence therapy during the 18th century, a monk-led prototype for what we now call sensory deprivation. Allegedly, guests were placed in dark soundproof cells for up to 6 days. Just them and their thoughts. Unsurprisingly, it didn't catch on. You shift under the blanket. The air smells faintly of beeswax and strangely rainwater on stone, even though it hasn't rained in hours. The candle flutters as if agreeing. Something about room 11 keeps prodding at the edge of your mind, like a song you half remember, but can't quite sing. Why would a room be locked in a monastery of all places? Isn't the whole point to offer refuge? You tell yourself it's probably a storage closet or more likely Brother Mathieu's attempt at monkish humor. A little spooky flourish to unsettle tourists. Except you're the only tourist. You decide to get up and investigate. Because of course you do. You're in a remote, centuries-old monastery in rural France, staying in a room beside the one no one wants to talk about. Curiosity is a muscle, and you've been lifting. Slipping on your boots, you ease the door open. The hallway yawns before you, impossibly quiet. The flickering sconces still burn, but their light doesn't seem to reach quite as far as it did earlier. Maybe you're just imagining that. Or maybe the dark here isn't an absence. Maybe it's a choice. Room 11 looks utterly ordinary from the outside. Plain oak door, iron keyhole, no markings, no carvings, no crucifix. You step closer and feel something odd temperature pressure. It's like a low-grade hum against your teeth, almost musical. You crouch and look at the base of the door. That faint draft is still there, bringing with it the unmistakable scent of camphor and rosewater, odd companions in the world of aromatics. Those were common in medieval embalming practices, you recall. Just a fun fact to tuck away for later. Sleep well. You knock lightly. Nothing. You knock again, this time more firmly. A pause. Then something knocks back. 3 slow, deliberate raps from inside. You jerk back, hard jackhammering. A breeze slithers through the corridor, extinguishing a nearby candle. Shadows lean in closer. You fumble your way back to room 14, slam the door, and press your back against it, like you're auditioning for a Victorian melodrama. The room hasn't changed, but your breath has. It's shorter now, ragged. The candle sputters. The bell on the nightstand rings once sharp and clean. You stare at it. It stares back, figuratively. You sit on the bed, willing your pulse to slow. Just a draft, a creaky old door. Probably a prank, some kind of mechanical trick hidden in the wood. Logical, sensible, except you didn't see any wiring or hinges or anything really besides centuries-old oak. To distract yourself, you pull one of the books from the desk drawer. A journal, handwritten. The leather binding crackles as you open it. The first page is dated 1872. The writer signs themselves simply as Frère Clement. You skim a few entries. At first, it's just benign monastic thoughts, weather, choir rehearsals, what to do with overripe root vegetables. But then, Brother Auguste heard knocking again from 11. He swears it speaks his name now. I advised fasting. A few pages later, assigned novice Jean-Luc to sweep West Wing. He never returned. We found his robe folded by the door to 11. Bell rang twice that night. You flip faster. Mathieu now insists we remove the hinges. But how do you remove a room? You freeze. The name Mathieu, the same monk who welcomed you, couldn't be the same one. The journal is over a century old, unless your eyes dart to the mirror above the desk. For a second, you think you see someone behind you, hooded, unmoving, but when you turn, nothing's there. Just your coat hanging from the hook. You think. You close the journal, carefully, as though being too abrupt might summon something literary. You lie down again, blanket up to your chin, bell untouched. The candle burns low. Somewhere down the hall, another door creaks open. Or maybe just the wind again. Or maybe room 11 is waiting. You don't remember falling asleep, but at some point, the dark softens into the gray blur of morning. There's no sunbeam slicing across the floor. This part of the abbey faces the woods, but the gloom is gentler now, less hostile. You blink, stretch, and instinctively check the bell on the nightstand. It hasn't moved, not since it rang once. The journal is still on the desk, its edges curled slightly, as if it too absorbed some of the night's unease. You consider opening it again, but instead you shuffle over to the window and draw back the curtain. Mist smothers the trees outside. Beyond the courtyard, a figure walks slowly toward the chapel. Hooded robe, same dark brown. Monastic gait. You assume it's Brother Mathieu until he glances up. His face, if it is a face, is oddly smooth, pale, featureless, like a wax figure halfway through creation. You step back instinctively, heart skipping, in that way it does when you're still deciding whether something's just weird or actually bad. Historians still argue whether ancient religious orders, especially isolated ones, intentionally cultivated these unsettling rituals to provoke spiritual clarity. Some say it was psychological training, manufacture fear, then conquer it through prayer. Others insist these weren't rituals at all, just accumulated quirks passed down through generations of men who spent too much time with silence and soup. You get dressed quickly. Breakfast is laid out in the refectory. A long wooden table, thick ceramic bowls, a small spread of bread, preserved fruit, and goat cheese. No one else is there. The chair legs groan as you sit, but the food is warm and real. You eat more than you expect. Hunger wins over nerves. Halfway through, Brother Mathieu arrives. He greets you with a bow and a tired smile, as if he too didn't sleep well. You settled in, he asks. You nod, unsure how much to reveal. It's peaceful. Peace comes in many flavors, he says, tearing off a bit of bread. Some bitter. A pause. You decide to go for it. What's with room 11? Mathieu stops chewing. There is no room 11. He replies too quickly. You wait. He sighs and gestures toward the far wall where a single crucifix hangs above the door. There used to be, but it was closed long ago. Why? Some rooms become too full of memory, which is a very poetic way to dodge a question. He doesn't elaborate, and you don't push. You finish your meal, thank him, and head out into the misty courtyard. The bell tower looms ahead, its stones slick with moss. You climb the spiral staircase because that's what you do in a horror story, where you're still pretending it isn't one. At the top, wind whistles through the slats. The great bell, a massive thing with Latin etched around its rim, hangs motionless. Dust lines the wooden floor. You see more of the abbey from up here. The chapel, the cloister, the western wing where room 11 sleeps like a sealed wound. From above, the layout is symmetrical, except for that side. It looks off. The shadows are deeper, even in daylight. You descend. You make your way through the cloister, trailing your fingers along the ancient stone. Latin inscriptions whisper just beneath the surface. You stop at a series of wall paintings, faded but discernible. One shows Saint Bartholomew flayed and holding his own skin. Common medieval imagery. But another panel shows something stranger. A room with no door, just a black void where a monk kneels, weeping as pale hands emerge from the darkness. You lean closer. The caption below it reads, Silere ut audiatur. Remain silent or be heard. Helpful. In the chapel, the air is thick with incense. Not fresh. It's the ghost of smoke, the residue of countless prayers. You sit for a moment, trying to calm your thoughts, trying not to hear the faint creaking echo from the west wing. Historians still debate the origins of this particular abbey. Some records claim it was founded in the 11th century by monks fleeing a heretical purge in Brittany. Others say it predates that, entirely built atop a much older pagan site. There's little consensus, but the one oddity all sources agree on. The original plans show no room 11. The rooms skip from 10 to 12. Later, when renovations were done in the 1600s, room 11 mysteriously appears in the drawings. Architectural error, or did the abbey make space? You return to your room. The bell is in a different place now, closer to the window. You didn't move it. The candle from last night is gone, and in its place is a fresh one. White, unlit. You strike a match. As it catches, something glints on the floor near the baseboard. You kneel. It's a small pin, bronze, shaped like a monk's hooded head. You didn't bring it. You don't know where it came from. You pocket it mostly out of habit. Later that afternoon, Brother Mathieu offers a tour. You pretend to be just another curious guest. He shows you the gardens, the crypt, the tiny library still holding leather-bound volumes of Psalms and Latin philosophy. It's charming, almost enough to make you forget the knocks. Almost. When you pass by the hallway again, the door to room 11 is slightly ajar, just a sliver. You glance at Mathieu. He's looking straight ahead, like he doesn't see it, or is pretending not to. You don't speak, not yet. You go back to room 14, close the door, and sit on the bed. Tomorrow, you promise yourself. Tomorrow, you open room 11. Night settles over the abbey, like a thick quilt, quiet, cold, and suffocating. The wind has dropped, but the stillness is worse somehow. You lie on the bed, fully clothed, listening to the wood groan, as if it's trying to stretch after centuries of disuse. Outside your window, the fog has crept back in. You leave the candle burning, just in case. At exactly midnight, there's a sound. Not a knock this time. A shuffle, slow and steady, like slippered feet dragging across stone. You hold your breath. It grows louder. Then it stops. Just outside your door. You sit up, pulse sticking in your throat like a second heart. There's no knock, no whisper, no bell. Just waiting. You creep toward the door, place your palm against the wood. It's warm. Not metaphorically, it's actually warm. As if someone pressed their cheek to the other side. But you don't open it. Instead, you slide the little monk head pin under the door. A peace offering. Or a test. Nothing happens. You return to bed, candle still flickering. When you wake, the pin is gone. Historians still argue whether medieval monks experienced hallucinations due to isolation, malnutrition, or genuine spiritual episodes. Some claim to hear the voice of God. Others saw shadowy visitors who offered riddles or impossible knowledge. In abbeys like this one, where silence was prized above all, those visions went unchallenged. No one spoke. No one confessed. Silence wasn't just a vow. It was a shield. You rise early, dress in layers. No breakfast this time. You bring your flashlight, though you don't turn it on yet. The hallway leading to room 11 is narrow, older than the rest of the abbey. You pass room 10, its door closed and unassuming. Room 12's door is newer, replaced at some point. Room 11, still ajar. You pause, then push it open. The room is small, smaller than yours, but not by much. A single bed, a desk, a small mirror nailed crookedly above a wash basin. Everything is coated in a fine layer of dust, undisturbed except for one thing, a worn indentation in the chair's cushion. Someone's been sitting there. You step inside. It's colder than the hall. Immediately, your skin prickles. The air smells off, damp but sweet, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. You close the door behind you, just to see. The moment it shuts, the room tightens. Not physically, not literally, but the sensation is unmistakable. You feel watched. Not in the classic horror movie way, but in the very real animal way. Like a deer in a clearing who knows the hunter hasn't fired yet. You sit in the chair. You wait. Minutes pass. The mirror doesn't reflect you properly. It bends the shape of your head ever so slightly, warping the angle. You wave your hand. It follows almost. A split-second delay. You stand again. There's something carved into the underside of the desk. You crouch to read it. Faint but legible, ego videbot. I will see you. Helpful. There's a faint scratching sound now. Not outside the room. Inside the wall. Right behind the bed's headboard. Like someone dragging a nail slowly across stone. You flick on the flashlight, point it at the wall. It stops. You knock once. The wall knocks back. Once. Not loud, just enough. Then silence again. In the far corner of the room, the floorboards are darker. Water damage. You tap them, hollow. One gives way slightly. You kneel, pry at it. It lifts. Underneath a small space barely larger than a shoebox. Inside a bundle of folded fabric wrapped in twine. You pull it out, unwrap it. It's a monk's robe, old, blood-stained. You freeze. The blood is not fresh, dried into the fibers rust brown with the unmistakable smell of iron. There's a hole in the shoulder where something sharp clearly pierced the cloth. You don't know if it's real. You don't know if it matters. You rewrap the robe, place it back, replace the board. Then you open the door and leave room 11. Back in your room, the bell is ringing. Just once, then silence. Later that day, you find Mathieu again. He's pruning a rose bush in the cloister. I went into room 11, you say. He doesn't look up. Then it has chosen you. You laugh dryly. That's very horror movie of you. There are things we do not name, he says, and rooms we do not seal fast enough. What happened in there? He sighs. The story goes like this, he says, trimming another thorny stem. Long ago, during a plague season, a young monk was locked in room 11 after displaying symptoms. Isolation, you understand. You nod, but he never stopped knocking. Mathieu continues. Not for food, not for prayer, just knocking. Always the same pattern. 3 slow, 1 fast, and then silence. The brothers assumed he died. You know what's coming. But when they opened the door, he says softly, the room was empty. No body. Just the robe. Historians still argue whether the plague reached this region at all, he adds. Some say it did. Others say this abbey was untouched, spiritually. That's another matter. You both fall quiet. That night, you sit in your room staring at the candle. You knock on your wall. 3 slow, 1 fast. You wait. Nothing. Then, from room 11, 3 slow, 1 fast. The knocking has begun. Again. The pattern echoes through the masonry like a heartbeat you can't ignore. 3 slow, 1 fast. Then the hush that makes your ears ring with everything left unsaid. You lie there, counting breaths, trying to decide whether courage is a virtue or a bad habit. Spoiler tonight, it's the latter. Instead of knocking back again, which feels a bit like accepting a collect call from the other side, you grab the candle, throw on your jacket, and tiptoe into the corridor. The air tastes of old wax and older vows. Somewhere in the abbey, a clock marks 2 a.m., though you don't remember seeing any clocks. Maybe the walls keep their own time. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing you've learned this week. Your destination isn't room 11. It's the front desk just off the entry hall, where the guest book and that dignified brass bell sit in perpetual stalemate. The hallway widens as you approach, floorboards shifting beneath your weight, the way a cat shifts when it decides you're still uninteresting enough to ignore. There it is, the ledger, thick as a sandwich of stone tablets, edges gilded once upon a time. You ease it open. The parchment pages sigh, like they've been waiting for you, flattered perhaps that someone under 40 still knows cursive. Names march down each page in tidy columns. Pilgrims, fleeing nobles, one suspiciously cheerful traveling dentist. Column after column lists room numbers 10, 12, sometimes even 15 when the abbey's at capacity, but never 11. Whole decades of visits, and the ledger hops that digit like it's bad luck at a roulette table. You flip back deeper into the 19th century. Ink darkens, handwriting stiffens. Finally, you stop at a page dated September 14th, 1871, right after the Franco-Prussian War wrapped up, when half of France was nursing pride and the other half was nursing actual wounds. A single signature trembles there in watery ink, A. Duvernois. Tiny, shaky, as though the quill weighed more than the writer's courage. Room number column, someone's penciled in a scratchy 11, then crossed it out so violently the nib tore the page. Mainstream fact break after the war. Many rural monasteries actually opened their doors as makeshift hostels for respite travel, a slow-motion national exhale. This abbey was one of them, according to ecclesiastical registers filed in Bordeaux. But as you can see, not all rooms were considered equal real estate. You run your finger over the jagged tear. The ink smear looks fresh, absurd as that seems. The blot glistens, still tacky. You sniff it, because why wouldn't you, and catch the faint scent of iron and lavender. Victorian fountain pen enthusiasts swore by lavender tincture to keep ink from molding. Apparently, it also keeps time from minding its own business. You turn the page, blank. No entries after Duvernois for nearly 6 months. The Abbey records claim it was closed for repairs that winter. Historians still argue whether that closure was due to structural damage from wartime skirmishes or cue finger-wiggling, ghost noise, spiritual emergencies the monks never fully explained. Your candle cutters casting shadows that shimmy like they've had too much coffee. You glance behind you, habit not paranoia mostly. Someone has placed the little monk head pin on the desk beside the ledger. You pocket it again because obviously you need that cursed collectible in your life. A soft rustle draws your eyes back to the page. The fresh ink is spreading very slowly, like a bruise. It forms a shallow pool, then trickles into the torn fiber, sketching thin veins toward the ledger's spine. You should close the book, maybe fetch Brother Mathieu. Instead, you flip forward 2 pages. There, scrawled in the margin, is a note in the same watery hand. Room 11 listens. Do not speak your name. Great tip, 12 hours late. A joke floats up because your brain's defense mechanism is stand-up comedian in crisis. At least they left a review. 1 star. Would not stay again. You snort quietly, half expecting the Abbey to issue a citation for inappropriate levity. You decide to check the modern guest book, the slim faux leather notebook lying next to the antique tome. Inside, Brother Mathieu's tidy script lists your arrival yesterday, assigning you to room 14. Beneath that, an empty space, then a silent numeral 11. No name, no date, just the number written hours ago in ink still drying. Funny, I don't remember signing twice, you mutter. Something creaks behind the desk. You swing the candle around. Nothing but shelves of dusty pamphlets in Latin and a bowl of peppermints nobody dares to eat. A whiff of metallic ink slips past same scent that filled the hallway last night. You sneeze loudly because even haunted monasteries can't dodge allergies. Quirky tidbit time: in the Middle Ages, monks occasionally mixed powdered gallnuts and wine into ink to keep it from freezing in winter. Effective, but it also gave the scriptorium a faint boozy aroma, an early form of office happy hour. Your nose tells you room 11's ink recipe might still be on tap. You close both books, carefully returning the modern ledger to its spot. The old tome you slide into a leather satchel hanging under the desk. Call it archival theft or preventative preservation, you'll justify it later. Then you ring the brass bell once just to see. The sound is dull, like striking wet yarn. Behind you in the hall, someone clears their throat. Soft, polite. You turn, half expecting Mathieu. No one's there, only a draft scuttling along the floor, carrying that rose and camphor perfume you've come to dread. You head back toward the guest wing satchel slung over your shoulder. The corridor is longer than you remember. The sconces spaced farther apart. As you pass room 12, its door nudges open a fraction, and a single sheet of paper slides into view, pushed from within. It flutters at your feet. You crouch, lift it. The paper is crisp ruled, decidedly modern hotel stationery from some Paris boutique. Scrawled across it in hurried pencil knocking. Stops when names are forgotten. Leave yours behind. Another helpful motivational poster for the nightmare scrapbook. You reach room 14. Your door mercifully is shut tight. You slip inside, lock it, and ease the satchel onto the bed. The bell on your nightstand is, of course, missing again. In its place stands the melted stub of last night's candle-guttered wax, pooled like a white rose rotting in reverse. Beside it, the monk head pin lies face down, splitting candlelight around its tiny hood. You sit open the antique ledger one more time. The ink blot has dried, but the tear still gleams with moisture. And at the bottom of the 1871 page, a new line has appeared, written in ink darker than midnight. You knocked. No signature, no room number, just accusation. You close the ledger, douse the candle, and lie back, fully clothed, notebook clutched to your chest like a dubious teddy bear. Somewhere down the corridor, 3 slow knocks. Answer one fast. Room 11 is filing paperwork, and you're already on page 1. You wake up with the faint sensation of paper brushing your cheek and the stubborn echo of a dream that refuses to explain itself. Your room is just as you left it, except the satchel's open on the floor. The ledger half spilled like a cat knocked it over mid-prowl. The candle has burned down to its wick, releasing that last sour puff of extinguished wax. The monk pin now rests neatly on your pillow, as if it too needed a nap. It's morning, or something like it. The sky outside the slatted window glows that cloudy French grey, the kind that never really commits to weather. You sit up, rub your eyes, and remind yourself that breakfast is included, which frankly is the strongest incentive to survive the next hour. The dining room is modest stone walls, vaulted ceiling, mismatched wooden chairs that all seem to creak in different languages. A few other guests murmur over their tea. You notice no one sits at the table nearest the door. Its chairs are perfectly tucked in. Its place settings are untouched. But there's a full pot of coffee steaming beside an empty cup, as though someone invisible prefers caffeine over subtlety. Brother Mathieu appears from the kitchen apron, dusted with flour, smile tired but genuine. He serves you a croissant the size of a small fox and offers jam in flavors that could double as potion ingredients. Elderberry and verbena pear and juniper. You half expect one to say mood reversal or memory suppression on the label. So he says lightly, "You've been exploring. You nod, chewing slowly. Had some trouble sleeping. Thought I'd read a bit." He chuckles, pouring your tea. The Abbey is good for that. Restless minds always find something. You pause. Has anyone stayed in room 11 recently? His hand falters barely. Just long enough for the tea to overfill your cup and spill silently onto the saucer. He rights the pot, dabs it with a napkin. "No," he says finally. "No one stays in room 11. Not anymore." But it's still made up. I've seen it. Mathieu smiles politely, like a man who's decided to give you the souvenir version of the truth. We keep the entire abbey prepared, even the unused corners. Tradition. Is that what happened in 1871, you ask? Was that tradition too? He doesn't ask how you know. Just presses his fingers together and gazes at the window. Emilien Duvernois was a scholar, he says. A classicist obsessed with Roman relics. He believed the abbey grounds covered an older temple, Gallo-Roman, possibly Mithraic. He arrived during the post-war chaos. Paid for a month, stayed 2 days. What happened? He left behind a manuscript, Mathieu says. Pages of fragmented notes, descriptions, diagrams, and many, many apologies. He thought he'd opened something. Mainstream fact time. Mithraic temples, Mithraea, were typically hidden underground, symbolizing a spiritual journey into darkness. Initiates reenacted cosmic battles in torchlight. Some were built directly beneath later Christian structures, and a few, inconveniently, were rumored to resist being forgotten. Historians still argue whether Duvernois ever existed. Mathieu continues. Some believe he was a fabrication, a metaphor. Others say his notes match accounts from nearby villages. Strange noises, visitors who forgot their names. The usual. The usual, of course. Quirky tidbit. In one hamlet not far from here, children used to chant a skipping rhyme that translates loosely as "never knock, never call, room 11 eats them all." Folk songs, history's most passive-aggressive warning labels. You finish your croissant. The dining room empties. Someone unseen refills the untouched coffee at the empty table. You decide, wisely or not, that it's time to revisit room 11. The hallway is sunlit now, or trying to be. The sconces no longer flicker, but they also no longer seem decorative. More like sentries. You stop in front of the door. It's closed, of course. Same heavy wood, same iron handle. This time you don't knock. You push gently. The door yields. Inside the room looks almost cozy bed. Crisply made light, spilling through sheer curtains, dust motes, performing slow ballet. The only sound is a ticking from the wall, an old metronome of all things, balanced on the bedside table. You step inside and everything shifts. The air feels denser. Your breath tastes like candle smoke and old leather. The floorboards creak in a way that sounds more like conversation than complaint. You sit on the edge of the bed, nothing happens. Then you spotted a bundle of yellowed papers tucked beneath the pillow. You unfold them carefully, handwritten, shaky but legible, a dated journal entry, Day 1. My name is Emilien Duvernois. I have entered room 11 against all advice. There is something beneath the floor. It dreams in time, not space. I must map it. More pages follow. Descriptions of sounds, of whispered names that weren't his, of a pressure behind the eyes, like he was remembering things he'd never lived. He writes of counting the knocks, of finding the monk pin in his coat when he hadn't brought it in, of seeing a woman in the mirror who looked like him, but older, thinner, staring back with a calm that terrified him more than any ghost. And finally, if I forget my name, let the room keep this record. If you find it, do not knock, do not write, do not leave offerings. Simply sit, wait, and remember who you are. That is how it begins again. You fold the pages back into their envelope. You leave the room silently, closing the door with reverence, like you're putting a child to sleep. Later that evening, you return to your own room. The pin is gone. The ledger is gone. The candle has been replaced by a fresh one. New wick, new wax, waiting. As you lie down, a thought occurs to you. Emilien Duvernois didn't disappear. He was recorded, copied, preserved by the room that feeds on memory. And now that you've read his pages, you've given the room something new to study. The bell sits quietly on your nightstand again. You don't ring it. You wake in the middle of the night with the distinct sensation that someone has just said your name. Not shouted, not whispered. Just said it, like an old friend calling across a courtyard. You bolt upright. The room is calm, candle unlit, window ajar, moonlight stretching across the floor like spilled milk. You tell yourself it was a dream. But dreams don't usually leave your heart pounding like this. The bell is missing again. You rise slowly, trying not to disturb the floorboards, though you're pretty sure that ship has sailed. You pad barefoot to the hallway. The abbey is utterly still. Too still. Even the wind seems to have called it a night. Room 11 waits at the far end. This time you hesitate. Mainstream historical fact. Medieval monastic orders were meticulous about silence. Some abbeys had entire vow of silence corridors, walkways, where speech was forbidden even under duress. The idea was to eliminate distraction, to let monks commune with God. But not all monks agreed on what counted as a distraction. Some thought certain voices came from divine inspiration. Others weren't so sure. You don't knock. You don't even touch the handle. You just stand there breathing. Then you hear it. From the other side of the door, 3 slow knocks. Not urgent, not loud, but unmistakably deliberate. You freeze. The hallway doesn't move. The sconces don't flicker. Your heart tries to climb through your throat. You step backward. 1 step, 2. From behind you, another sound, faint, tinny. A page turning. You spin around. The ledger is back, sitting neatly in the middle of the hallway floor. Quirky tidbit. Some old monastic ledgers used red ink to mark entries considered supernatural distractions. Often, these were left blank on purpose, with only a single name written at the top. One such entry from 1843 lists the name Emilien, though no monk by that name was recorded that year. The space below entirely filled with tiny hand-drawn doors. You pick up the ledger. Inside a new page, fresh ink. It reads, Section 7. You finally listened. Let's begin again. There is no author, no date. The handwriting looks eerily similar to yours. You flip back through the pages. Everything else is gone. No monk names, no old entries, just this one page. As if the ledger has become a mirror, showing you only what you bring to it. You return to your room, or at least you think it's your room. Something's different. The window is no longer ajar, but sealed shut. The candle is half burned, although you swear it was new earlier. And the monk's pin is now pinned to the pillow, but on the opposite side from last time. Also, the door no longer has a lock, just a small carved symbol too worn to recognize. You lie down, close your eyes, and dream. You are walking the abbey halls in a robe that isn't yours. Your fingers brush the stone walls as if they are familiar. You speak Latin, though you never learned it. You light candles you didn't place. You kneel before, for a painting that hasn't been restored in centuries. You know the face in the painting. It's yours. You wake with a jolt, gasping. Was it morning again? You check the candle. It's full once more. Historians still argue whether certain abbeys were ever actually decommissioned. Some believe that while the church declared them closed, monks continued their rituals in secret, slipping between religious orders and architectural renovations, like shadows under paint. One theory suggests that the Abbey of Saint-René never closed at all. It simply transitioned, became something else, something aware. And perhaps room 11 is its heart. You dress quickly, no breakfast, no lingering in the dining hall. The other guests seem to avoid your gaze now. Or maybe it's the other way around. Brother Mathieu catches your eye just as you reach the cloister door. Leaving so soon, he asks, not with surprise, with resignation. I have what I came for. He nods. Few do. You pause. Do you know what it is? Room 11. He looks at the courtyard. The ivy curling along the stone arches. It's where memory sleeps, he says, and sometimes dreams of waking up. You step out into the morning, or maybe the memory of morning. The air is clean, brisk. The gravel crunches under your shoes in a rhythm you've now heard in your dreams. You reach your car. There's something in the passenger seat. The ledger. No dust, no mold, no missing pages. You open it. The first entry now reads, Section 8. You made it out, but the room is patient. You glance back at the abbey. The window to room 11 is closed again, but you're almost certain someone is watching. You drive for hours without turning on the radio. The countryside unfolds around you in soft green waves, interrupted only by the occasional stone wall or twisted road sign. It feels unreal, like the abbey never happened, like you dreamt the whole thing while napping in a gas station parking lot. But the ledger sits heavy in your lap at every red light. You can't throw it out. You tried once, just after the third village. Left it gently on a bench outside a bakery. 15 minutes later, it was waiting on your passenger seat, again smelling faintly of croissants and moss. You take the long way back home. The back way through towns so old their names haven't made it onto Google Maps. Places with no souvenir shops, no postcards of postcards. Just narrow streets and cats that look like they've been judging humans since the Renaissance. Mainstream historical fact. After the French Revolution, hundreds of abbeys and monasteries were secularized, converted into schools, prisons, and even private homes. While some retain clear historical footprints, others were almost entirely erased, their land quietly sold to nobility or wealthy collectors of the past. One such estate near the Loire Valley was rumored to contain more than 50 individual doors with no corresponding rooms. At a gas station near Dijon, you stop to fill up. In the bathroom mirror, you notice something odd. Your reflection is just a half-beat delayed. You stare, blink, lean left, lean right. The reflection follows, but always a fraction too slow. You splash water on your face, breathe, and try again. Better. You head outside, and the gas station attendant gives you a curious look. "You okay there?" he asks in French. You nod, then pause. "Have you ever heard of the Abbey of Saint-René?" He scratches his beard. "Maybe. Long time ago. There are a few ruins like that out east. Haunted ones." You laugh nervously. "Haunted how?" He shrugs. "People hear voices, see things. Guests go missing or come back different." That night in your hotel room, you flip open the ledger again. A new page waits. Section 8. Never leave the door open when it rains. Well, it's not raining. Not yet. You sleep with the lights on anyway. In your dreams, you're a monk again. But this time, you're not walking the halls. You're building them, laying the stones by hand, chanting under your breath, bleeding into the mortar. Your fingers are blistered. Your robe is soaked through. But you keep stacking, keep praying, keep singing. Not because you believe, but because you're terrified of what happens when you stop. Quirky tidbit. Some monks believed that stone itself could carry memory. There are carvings in certain Romanesque chapels shaped like knots, not for decoration, but to trap prayers or secrets inside the architecture. If you whisper into a wall just right, they said it'll whisper back. Eventually, you wake to thunder. The window's open. You're sure you closed it. You close it again and double-check the latch. It holds, barely. And then you notice the condensation on the glass. Fingerprints on the inside. You lean in closer. They form a rough shape, 3 vertical lines, 1 diagonal slash across them. Tally marks. Someone's been counting. Historians still argue whether monks engaged in memory fasting, a now debunked theory that they'd intentionally suppress certain thoughts or names for decades, hoping the mind would eventually forget them forever. Some argue this wasn't to forget the pain, but to keep the memories locked away from something that fed on them. You light the bedside lamp, pick up the ledger. The next page is already inked. It's your handwriting. It reads, Section 9. You should have stayed asleep, but you haven't written anything. Have you? You don't scream. That would make it real. Instead, you place the ledger face down on the nightstand, as though burying it beneath a polite silence will stop whatever force is quietly orchestrating all of this from continuing its performance. You breathe, count to 10, touch the lamp base, solid. Reality check, solid. The page in your own handwriting, how you hadn't touched a pen. You hadn't even uncapped one. You reach for the book again slowly, like it might bite. But the moment your fingers graze the leather, the room tilts ever so slightly, just enough to make the floor feel soft, untrustworthy. Mainstream historical fact. In pre-modern France, especially in more isolated monastic communities, sleep was not structured in a single block like it is today. Monks followed a segmented pattern called biphasic sleep, waking around midnight for matins, then returning to rest. This interrupted rhythm often led to vivid, hypnagogic experiences, dreamlike hallucinations, half remembered as divine or demonic encounters. You close the ledger without looking again and shuffle toward the mirror, just to check, just to see. Your reflection still lags. You lift your hand and wave. 1 Mississippi, 2, then it moves. a little too eagerly. You back away. There's a new sound now, low and wet, like fabric dragging across tile, like bare feet just out of the bath but slower, sticky. You freeze. Listen harder. It's coming from the hallway. You lean close to the door. On the other side, silence. Until knock knock. You whisper, "Who is it?" No reply. Knock knock. Softer this time. Just like in the Abbey. You don't open it. You turn to the ledger again. Maybe the next page has instructions, rules, an escape clause. The page is blank. You touch the paper. It's warm. Quirky tidbit. In a bizarre 17th century monastic practice known as reclusio inter partes, some monks voluntarily wall themselves into tiny stone cells, literally bricked in with only a small hatch for food and waste. The practice was considered extreme even then, but those who did it claimed they were listening more clearly to divine echoes embedded in the stone. Another knock, no longer from the door, this time from inside the wardrobe. You freeze. Historians still argue whether the phenomenon known as saints' doorways were metaphor or masonry legendary spots in certain churches where stepping through a particular archway at midnight under a new moon could transport the devout to a spiritual plane. Some claim these were simple metaphors for entering a new phase of faith. Others point to missing persons records logged by abbots in the margins of sermon books, numbers that never matched the monastery's head count. You approach the wardrobe step by step. You could leave the room, sure, just run. But somehow, you know the knocking would follow. Maybe not right away. Maybe not even tomorrow. But eventually, so instead, you open the wardrobe. Empty, almost. At the very bottom, folded neatly, is a linen robe, familiar, monastic, stained slightly at the hem. Mud or wine or something darker. You don't want to touch it, but you do. It feels new. You blink, and the hotel room is gone. You're standing in this abbey hallway again. Candle in hand, ledger in the other. And this time, you're not alone. A figure waits ahead, tall, wrapped in shadow. No face, no features. But it has the ledger. Another copy of it. Your copy. It opens it. Reads a passage aloud in a whisper you can barely hear. Section 9. You should have stayed asleep. The hallway dims. The walls breathe. You shut your eyes. When you open them, you're back in your hotel bed. The robe still at your feet. The mirrors cracked. And the ledger, now it reads, Section 10. You were never the one reading. You blink again hard. Not because you're sleepy, though, and a strange heaviness keeps tugging at your limbs, but because this can't be real. Because there are too many rules being broken. Here are too many things happening without cause. And your brain is starting to feel like it's made of fog and little bells. You sit up in bed. The robe has vanished. The mirror is still cracked, and the ledger is lying exactly where you left it, only now it feels heavier, like it's watching you somehow, or listening. You open it slowly. The next page is already filled in. Not in ink, but in faint embossings, like Braille for the damned. It reads, Now return the knock. You close the book. You walk to the door, and you knock. Once, twice, 3 times. From the hallway, silence. Then dragging. That wet cloth on stone shuffle again. Coming toward you. But this time you don't step back. You lean closer to the door. Not out of courage exactly. More like compliance. Mainstream historical fact. In medieval France, monasteries often held their own court systems complete with judges' juries and the authority to sentence monks or even local villagers to harsh penance or exile. Their legal codes, bound in heavy illuminated tomes, were equal parts scripture and superstition. Some of these books contained margins filled with moral guidance, dreams, visions monks claimed came to them during sleep, then interpreted as laws. The door handle twitches. You yank it open. Nothing. But the hallway has changed. No longer the soft carpeted corridor of your hotel. Now it's stone again. Moist. Echoing with some distant wind that has no source. You're standing at the very threshold of something ancient. You step out. The door closes itself behind you. Now the ledger is gone. Quirky tidbit. There's an obscure French folk tale, mostly forgotten outside of the Auvergne region, about the chambre muette, the silent room. A traveler who found it could make a single request to learn the future. But in exchange, the room would erase 1 year of their memories. The tale ends with a twist. The man gets his answer but forgets the question. He spends his life trying to remember what he was supposed to know. You walk forward. Your footsteps make no sound. You glance down, your feet are bare. You round a corner. There's a candle-lit alcove, and in it sits a monk in full habit facing away from you. He's writing something in a book that looks suspiciously like your ledger. The scratching of the quill is the only sound in the entire place. You approach. He does not turn. You peek over his shoulder. The page is blank. Only the sound of writing remains. And that's when it hits you, the sound is coming from inside your own head. You jerk back. The monk vanishes. You're in a different corridor now. A statue of Saint Jerome looms in a niche ahead, but something's wrong. His lion companion has no face. You're losing track of how long you've been walking. Time no longer has edges here. Historians still argue whether certain monastic labyrinths found in 12th century French cloisters were symbolic or functional. Some say they were used for meditative walks, tracing the slow steps of faith. Others suggest they were tools of psychological endurance punishment disguised as contemplation. A few French scholars go further, arguing that the geometry of these paths aligns suspiciously well with liminal space theories in ancient architecture. You stop in front of a wooden door. No number. Just one phrase carved crudely into the center. Let the guest write next. You're the guest. You're holding a quill. You don't remember picking it up. There's a blank page on the door itself. You lean forward and without thinking, begin to write. Just a single line. Room 11 is waking up. The door swings open on its own. Inside is your hotel room, but warped, too long, as if the dimensions have been stretched. The bed is too far away. The lamp flickers in slow motion. The windows are where the ceiling should be. And on the far side of the bed, a version of you lying asleep, breathing softly. You step inside. Your duplicate stirs, opens its eyes, whispers something you can't hear. Then you're in the bed again, alone, except the quill is still in your hand. You lie there, staring at the ceiling, or where the ceiling should be. It pulses slightly now, as if breathing with the same rhythm as your own chest. The lamp buzzes softly. The familiar white noise hum returns, but twisted somehow, layered with a faint chant beneath it. Not Latin, not French, something older. You sit up, and the bed creaks in protest like it knows you're not meant to leave it again. The room's proportions are normal now, or seem to be. The mirror is whole. The robe is back draped neatly over the chair. But the ledger is gone. You look toward the door. The peephole is dark. Mainstream historical fact. In 18th century France, religious boarding houses often included a ritual called la veille, a vigil when novices would stay up through the night in silence, seated in candlelight, beside symbols of death skulls, hourglasses, or freshly extinguished incense. The ritual was intended to humble the body and awaken the soul. Some records claim visions were common. Others note that some novices never spoke again. You rise, walk to the door. This time you don't knock. You listen. Nothing. No wind. No footsteps. No dragging. But then you feel it, not outside the door. Behind you. You turn slowly. The duplicate you is sitting on the edge of the bed, hands on their knees, staring forward. Mouth moving. No sound. And then the whisper returns, this time outside your head, audible barely. Which one are you? You answer without thinking, the guest. They smile faintly, then vanish. The air grows heavier like thick velvet draped across your chest. You look down, your hands are covered in faint ink smudges, though you haven't written anything recently. You return to the desk. The ledger is back. This time it's open to a new page. The words are shaky, different from before. He who knocks last leaves first. You stare at the sentence for what feels like hours, but no clock ticks, no sun rises. Time here is not a river, it's a locked well. Quirky tidbit, there exists a fragmentary 16th century French diary, unsigned and never officially published, known as Le Manuscrit de l'Envite. It describes a traveler who arrives at a rural inn that doesn't exist on any map, where each guest room is named after a sin. Room 11 is labeled oubli, forgetting. The diary abruptly ends mid-sentence. The last legible phrase, I have finally seen myself knock. You whisper aloud, why knock at all? A knock replies. Once, not from the door, but from the wall behind the mirror. You cross the room. The mirror is no longer glass, it's black. Not a reflection, not even a surface. Just the absence of light holding your gaze like an old debt. You reach toward it, cold, then a ripple. The blackness parts like water, and behind it, a corridor, very narrow, barely shoulder width, lit with oil lamps that flicker without casting heat. You step through. The mirror seals behind you with a soft thump. You are in the bones of the building now, behind the walls, walking through the architectural memory of the place. Faint markings on the brick suggest others have walked here before. Names etched, dates, some in languages that never made it into textbooks. The passage slopes downward. As you descend, the light dims, until the only thing ahead is a glow. Not from flame, but from phosphorescent lichen covering a door at the very bottom. The number is carved in the stone frame. You press your ear to it. No sound. You push it open and walk in. Historians still argue whether the practice of naming rooms in early French monasteries, sometimes after virtue sins or scriptural verses, was meant to reflect actual occupancy or moral alignment. One theory holds that monks who sinned in specific ways were required to sleep in rooms named for that flaw, hoping the association would burden their dreams and inspire repentance. Others believe these were metaphoric ritual designations never meant to be inhabited. Inside room 11, it's not dark. It's candlelit. An old bed, a desk, a mirror. Exactly like your room, but coated in decades of dust. No footprints, no signs of life. And on the bed, lying peacefully, a monk's habit, empty. As if someone once lay there and dissolved into air. On the pillow beside it, a single key. You take it. As your fingers close around it, you hear something behind you. A whisper soft as wind through lace. You're the last guest. You hold the key tightly in your hand, as if it might melt away if you loosen your grip. The room feels patient, waiting, like a held breath across centuries. You don't know what the key opens. You don't ask. You pocket it anyway. Dust drifts lazily in the candlelight, and the shadows flicker like shy ghosts. You don't sit on the bed. You don't touch the desk. You walk slowly in a circle, eyeing the walls. The air smells of old stone and lavender gone stale. Then you notice something. The mirror in this room doesn't reflect you at all. You wave. Nothing. You blink. Still nothing. Mainstream historical fact, medieval monasteries, especially in rural France, were often constructed with listening walls, acoustic tricks that allowed sound to travel between rooms. It helped with silent communication between monks, or so the theory went. But in some older records, the phenomenon was blamed for spreading invisible madness, where a single, whispered phrase could drive several residents into trance-like states. You stare into the unresponsive mirror. Then it flickers. Not a reflection, a vision. You see room 11 again, but not as it is. Brighter, furnished. A young monk scribbling frantically into a leather-bound ledger. He stops suddenly and turns, looking straight at you, and mouths something you can't hear. Behind him, the door creaks open. He doesn't turn. You shout silently, point, but he doesn't move. The shadow enters, cloaked, faceless. It puts a hand on the monk's shoulder. The mirror goes black. You step back, heart thudding in your throat. The door your way out is no longer there. Just smooth stone. Quirky tidbit. In some lesser-known French folklore, there's mention of the keeper of the 11th step, a figure who appears only once, at the 11th knock, on the 11th hour, during the 11th day of the 11th month. The legend is linked to a now defunct monastery whose remaining ruins have precisely 10 steps, with the 11th buried underground. No one has excavated it. No one dares. A sound interrupts your thoughts, a low, dragging noise from the ceiling. You look up. The candle flames begin to tilt in one direction, as if something is pulling the air, and the air is growing thicker, syrupy, harder to breathe. You feel a tug not on your body, but on your memories. Your name feels fuzzy, the month uncertain. Where you came from, it's slipping. You pull the key from your pocket, holding it like a talisman. It warms faintly in your palm. You look around for something, anything the key might fit. Then you see it, a small metal plate knee-height at the base of the wall, barely noticeable, covered in dust. You kneel, brush it off. A tiny keyhole. You insert the key. It clicks. You turn. A groan, like the sigh of the entire building. The wall begins to shift, stones rearranging, as if the monastery remembers its own blueprints. A small tunnel opens no taller than a crawl space, but lined with soft golden light. You go in. You're crawling now, hands and knees against warm earth. The walls seem to hum gently, almost comfortingly, and just as claustrophobia tightens its grip, you emerge. A massive circular chamber, dome ceiling, no doors, just a ring of 11 chairs, and 11 mirrors behind them. Each chair is empty, except one, the 12th. At its foot lies another robe folded neatly, and another ledger. This one is open, and a line is freshly written. He has seen himself leave. Historians still argue whether monastic traditions ever included the concept of the mirrored trial, a ritual of solitude where initiates would sit surrounded by mirrors for hours, seeking to confront not their reflections, but their absence. One interpretation suggests this was an allegory for the divine gaze. Another claims it was a punishment for doubt. You stand in the center of the circle. Each mirror shows you, but differently. Younger in one, older in another, sleeping in a third. One mirror shows you knocking, another shows you leaving, another shows you sitting in room 11 writing this very story. Your head swims. You step back. All the reflections vanish, except one. You, right now, staring. And then the reflection smiles. But you didn't. The reflection doesn't blink. It doesn't breathe. But it's smiling. A slow, crooked curve of the mouth that doesn't feel quite human. You try to move, but your limbs feel syrupy, like they're moving through honey. That smile, your smile, but not really, starts to stretch just a little too far. Then it stops. The reflection raises one hand palm outward. You instinctively mimic it, but it doesn't move. It's not copying you anymore. And then the mirror fogs over. You're left staring at a haze of your own unease. Behind you a chair creaks. You whip around, still empty. But the robe is gone. Mainstream historical fact. In the 15th century, monastic communities often employed elaborate symbolic ceremonies for transitions induction, rituals, silent fasts, and mirror gazing among them. These rites were designed to strip away worldly identity, inviting the initiate to die before death in pursuit of higher clarity. It's believed some of these rituals took place in sealed chambers for days at a time. You don't want to sit in that chair, but something about the room is changing. The ceiling above seems lower. No, it feels lower. The air has thickened again, and a low hum vibrates deep in your teeth. You step back toward the crawl space. Gone, sealed behind clean stone. Your escape route has vanished. Again, you turn looking for options, for sense. Then barely a whisper, you hear it. Knock. Just that. Soft. Right behind your ear. You spin around. No one. Knock. It comes again, this time from the mirror. Knock. A third time now from the chair. You are absolutely not knocking. But your hand twitches anyway. The reflection returns, now normal, just your face. Pale. Blinking rapidly. You hear the number 11 echo faintly in your head. 11 chairs, 11 steps, 11 knocks. Then it stops. All sound, even your breathing seems stolen from you. You walk unsteadily toward the mirror that showed you leaving earlier. Now it shows the door to room 11. It's closed. You watch as your hand raises and knocks. Once, twice, 11 times. Then the door creaks open. Slowly, inside is yourself, sitting calmly, smiling. But you weren't there when you knocked, were you? Quirky tidbit. In 17th century accounts from French spiritual retreats, there were rumors of mirror twins, people said to leave behind lingering echoes of themselves in sacred chambers. These reflections, once awakened, would live on within polished surfaces, whispering from glass to glass, across monasteries, inns, even homes of the nobility. One chronicler swore a guest at Mont Saint-Michel had seen himself twice in the same mirror, but only one had blinked. You take a deep breath, or try to. The room resists it. Your thoughts scatter, reform, and scatter again. You walk to the circle of chairs. One by one, you touch each of the 11. Cool wood, quiet vibration. But the 12th, the one with no mirror behind it, feels warm, pulsing. You sit, not because you want to, because it's time. The moment your body touches the chair, all 11 mirrors burst to life, not reflection scenes. Each one shows a different version of room 11, one lit by firelight crackling, one filled with water up to the bed frame, one where it's snowing indoors, one where the room is upside down, one filled with shadows moving on their own. Each a different fate, a different timeline. You see yourself in each one, and in every version, you're not alone. There's always something else in the room, always behind you. Historians still argue whether tales of echo chambers found in abandoned monasteries were metaphorical or real. Descriptions vary. Some speak of physical rooms that trap memories, others of spiritual places where time bends. A 19th century Jesuit journal references a chambre d'écoute, or listening chamber, where monks would sit in silence to hear the sins of the building itself. Suddenly, the mirrors go black. The chair tilts slightly backward and you fall, not down but inward. It's not pain you feel, it's weightlessness, a suspension. And then, room 11, again. Same bed, same desk, same candle still burning. You're standing in the center of the room, breathing hard. The door is open behind you. You look in the mirror. There's no reflection. Not anymore. Just a faint shimmer. like heat rising off stone. Then from somewhere very far away, a knock. 1, 2, a slow 11, and the door starts to close. All by itself. You lunge for the door, but it shuts softly, deliberately, just before your hand reaches it, and clicks. Not a slam, not a bang, just a gentle finality. You're sealed in again. Room 11 breathes with you. The silence now has texture. It's not empty, it's listening. You don't want to turn around, but you do. The 12th chair is gone. Where it was, there's only stone. But it's rippling, like the surface of a pond disturbed by breath. You stare. Your reflection steps out of it. No mirror now, just you. Or not you. It has your eyes, but it moves differently. Looser, like a marionette that's just remembered it doesn't need strings. You say nothing. It smiles, then walks past you without a word and sits calmly at the desk, quill in hand, begins writing. Ink flows across yellowed parchment, lines and lines. You step closer. It's writing everything you're thinking in real time. Even this moment, even this sentence. You blink. So does it. Mainstream historical fact. Some Carthusian monks in France maintained confession journals, personal records they would write in during prolonged silent retreats. These texts were never meant to be read, considered sacred dialogues between the monk and God. Strangely, a few of these journals were discovered posthumously filled with second-person narrative, as if they were written to someone else entirely. You try to speak. Your reflection stops writing, looks up, and says your voice but slower. You've already knocked. You're just catching up. Then it vanishes. Not a dissolve. Just gone. The quill drops to the desk. Ink still flowing though, but no hand guides it. It keeps writing. You step back. The room begins to tilt, not physically, but visually. The shadows deepen along angles that don't belong. Books on the shelf begin whispering. You can't hear words, just the rise and fall of their spines breathing. You reach for the desk drawer. You don't remember deciding to, but your hand is already on the handle. You pull. Inside a smooth stone, round as an egg, warm to the touch. Carved with the number 11 in what looks like soot. Quirky tidbit. Some French folklore refers to the pierre de silence, a small black stone said to steal a single sound forever. Folklorists believe these were given to monks during initiation to seal away one word or secret they could never speak again. Most were lost, but one was recovered in the ruins of an abbey near Avignon. Still warm, you pocket the stone. Everything in the room inhales. The candle extinguishes itself. The smoke curling into words you almost but not quite recognize. You blink. Room 11 is now lit from within the walls. A sourceless glow, peach-colored like late sunset. You move toward the bed. Something is there now. A book. You didn't notice it before. You open it. Blank pages. But as you flip through, you begin to see your own memories being sketched one by one. Childhood. Moments you forgot. That one time in the 5th grade with the birds. That hallway you've dreamed of, but never seen in waking life. That door. That number. Historians still argue whether the practice of monastic dream, scribing a discipline where monks recorded their nightly dreams before speaking, a word in the morning, was purely spiritual or a form of early psychiatric therapy. A recently translated manual describes certain repeating doors seen in dreams as indicators of a returning soul. You reach the final page. It's black, no ink, just black paper. You touch it and immediately feel something touch the back of your neck. Cold, light, barely there. You freeze, slowly turn. Nothing behind you. But the book is gone now. The bed's made again. The robe is back on the hook. The candle lights itself, and the door to room 11 swings open silently. Only this time, There's nothing beyond it. Just more room 11, a copy of this room. Inside that copy, you, standing, watching. It's not threatening. It's waiting. You take one step toward the door. The version of you inside the next room 11 smiles, lifts a hand, and knocks 11 times, then disappears into the far wall. The copy of room 11 beyond now has another door and another version of you. You could keep going. You feel that option hanging in the air, but you don't have to. You could stay here. The version of the room you know, the robe, the candle, the chair. You sit again. The circle of mirrors returns, but this time they show empty rooms. No alternate selves, no shadows, just peace. You lean back. The door creaks closed. You breathe. For the first time in what feels like hours, it's a steady, complete breath. No flicker of fear. No shadow crouched behind your ribs. The chair is comfortable now. You hadn't noticed before, but it's padded slightly. Worn in the way favorite armchairs are. Like it remembers how to hold you. Outside the small window, the light hasn't changed. Still that gentle, not quite morning, not quite evening blue. The kind of sky that stretches across centuries. You turn your head slightly and notice there's a cup of something on the table. It wasn't there before. Steam curls upward in lazy spirals. You pick it up. It's warm. Smells faintly of cloves, milk, and something earthy. Mugwort, maybe lavender. It tastes like comfort. Mainstream historical fact. In some monastic orders during the early 18th century, monks would steep dried herbs in warm milk before bed, not for flavor, but to induce lucid dreaming. Recipes varied, but most included a blend of calming ingredients and mild hallucinogens like valerian or blue lotus. The goal wasn't sleep. It was a guided sleep. You sip slowly, the room wrapped around you like a thick woolen cloak. The mirror across from you no longer reflects anything, not even you, just matte silver, like the surface of a pond frozen in a single moment. You lean forward out of curiosity, and for just a second, you swear you see a name written on the glass. Your name, but in the handwriting of someone who hasn't existed for hundreds of years. Then it's gone. A soft knocking, not the sharp echoing kind, gentle, almost like a cat pawing at the door. You rise and walk across the room. Open it. This time, there's no infinite corridor, no duplicates, just the hallway, plain stone, familiar and calm, the kind of hallway that smells faintly of wood polish and old linens. Safe somehow. As you step out, you glance back. Room 11 hasn't changed. The candle's still lit. The robe still sways ever so slightly. The bed's neatly made. You smile. You knock once gently before pulling the door closed. And for a moment, you think you hear something knock back. Quirky tidbit. In the mid-19th century, a small monastery in southeastern France became briefly famous for a practice called la veille du silence, or the silent wake. Each monk would spend one full night a year in an empty, mirrorless room said to hold echoes of prayers whispered centuries before. Those who participated often claimed to emerge with a profound sense of clarity, or sometimes never spoke of the experience at all. Your steps echo down the hallway, not ominous now, just ordinary. And beneath them, you hear another sound, the faint rush of morning stirring, a hint of bread baking, distant bird song, life returning. Historians still argue whether this monastery ever officially closed. Some records claim it was abandoned in 1894. Others list a few monks still living here well into the 1940s, though no census data supports this. One recurring rumor suggests room 11 was never on the floor plan. Even when visitors try to photograph it, the door would always appear closed in the prints. You reach the main atrium. The same gentle monk is there, the one who led you earlier. He offers a polite nod, says nothing, but hands you a small envelope. It's unmarked. You don't open it. Not yet. Instead, you walk past him, back out into the early morning light. Cool air brushes your face. You exhale. Whatever was in that room, it's part of you now. You won't explain it, but you'll remember it. Just maybe not all at once. Maybe only when you dream. And now, as the last shadows of that long hallway fade from your memory, your breath begins to deepen. The soft hush of night settles gently around you, like an old blanket pulled up beneath the chin. You can still feel the cool stone underfoot. Or maybe it's just the press of the bed sheets. Hard to say now. Let that uncertainty comfort you. Let your thoughts meander without pressure, without purpose, like ivy finding its way up an old monastery wall. There's no urgency here, no destination. Just the soft drift of images and sensations of voices half remembered and doors that don't open unless you're ready. Every hallway ends eventually. Every mirror only shows what it must. The flickering candle in room 11 still burns somewhere. Not for fear, not for warning, but simply because that's what candles do. They light the dark and ask nothing in return. Whatever you carried into that room, you've left some of it behind. And whatever followed you out, it means you no harm. You've walked in the footsteps of long-forgotten monks, sipped their dream milk, sat in their silent chairs. Their mysteries have touched you like moth wings against your cheek, barely there, and yet impossible to ignore. Let those wings settle now. Let your mind close gently, the way old books do, pages curling into one another with a sigh. There's no need to understand it all tonight. Let the story drift away. Let sleep take its place. You're safe here. You always were.